Hello?
Spider-Man, I need help! I'm trapped in a closet!
Nah, I don't really feel like it.
What? How you doing? Today I'm gonna be ranking the Spider-Man films because Spider-Man has been popping off this year, and if there was like one last thing that I wanted to do a ranking on, it was definitely gonna be Spider-Man. Spider-Man is the man, and his movies are lit as fuck. However, there are some exceptions to the rule. There are some pretty bad Spider-Man movies, which I'm gonna get into that topic. So don't mind the fan being on over there. For some reason the heat is fucking stupid and it's on when it's not supposed to be, and it doesn't help that I'm wearing a jacket. So let me clarify that I am going to be including the Miles Morales movies, and I'm going to be including the Sony Spin-Off movies. So starting off at the bottom, the worst of these movies to me, 13th place, is going to be Venom Let There Be Carnage. Now, especially considering after I just got done watching the Spider-Man 2 game, like the entire movie with all the cutscenes and stuff, this Venom is pathetic. If you know me by now, which you still don't, you should at least know something, which is that I don't like when they take dark source material and make that appeal towards children. That is probably now going to be my third biggest pet peeve, because that is a constant thing that has been happening for the past several years now that is starting to piss me off. And there was no bigger example than this movie, which was just another cliche, you know, duo that breaks up because they have conflict with each other and then they have to reunite by the end of the movie to take on the big bad. But they do it with Eddie Brock and the symbiote, and they make the symbiote a fucking joke, and I fucking hate that, especially considering after Spider-Man 2 the game showcased to me, finally, after all these years, Venom's true fucking potential, which thank you for that. But now it just shows me that this Venom is a fucking lousy piece of shit. Especially when he's talking about the Cookie Monster all the time. I got the Cookie Monster voice. It's fucking stupid. And there's various points in this movie that are so fucking ridiculous and stupid, where they treat the whole symbiote aspect like if it meant nothing. Like how the symbiote was just passing through body to body, as if the first movie didn't clarify that if he gets a wrong host, that host is going to fucking die. And even when he does manage to get a perfect host and he takes on the form of that host, it's like the host in general of who he's taking control of has no say in anything. And I get they try to write it off as if, oh, he was too drunk to like be aware, but at the same time it's like, well, he's got a fucking host. Why the fuck is he not talking with the host? Why is he just in control completely? Like, what? That didn't make any fucking sense to me, and I found that really fucking ridiculous, especially when he's just out there partying. Yeah, Venom. So fucking stupid. And then you get to the Cletus Cassidy stuff, which I thought he could have been cool. I thought he could have been really great, but without a rated R movie, you're not gonna get Carnage at his full potential, and clearly that's exactly what happened. They fucking nerfed Carnage like he was nothing. They also had Scream in here, who is pathetic as compared to her symbiote form. Again, Spider-Man 2 the game showcased to me what a Scream could really be like. And then Carnage just gets fucking bodied by Venom, killed off. See you bye, Cletus Cassidy. No, I fucking hate this film. This is probably the one Spider-Man film that I could say that I flat out hate, albeit there is another one that I do have a lot of thoughts for, but I'll get to that when I get to that. Coming in 12th place, though, is going to be Morbius, a completely forgettable, generic movie, and that's really all it's got going for it. I honestly wouldn't have put it any lower, considering the fact that it is literally so basic. It's so basic and bland that there's really no substance, especially considering when you have a fucking vampire as your main character per se, and you don't really do much involving that. But honestly, who the fuck remembers this movie? It is so basic. I guess some people could have had the same argument regarding Mario Brothers earlier this year. The thing about Mario Brothers though, which I will agree on, it is basic, but that's the point. That's Mario Brothers. That's not Morbius though. Morbius is a fucking vampire guy. There's so many things you could do with that, and they just do the most cliche route with no specialty to it at all. I don't remember shit about this movie, but why I would have this movie over Venom Let There Be Carnage is because I wouldn't have a reason to hate watch the entire time. And I don't want to fucking watch Venom Let There Be Carnage again. That shit is a piece of shit. Coming in at 11th place is going to be Spider-Man Far From Home. Easily the worst Spider-Man centric movie that we've ever gotten, considering the fact that Spider-Man is really not Spider-Man at all. He doesn't act like Spider-Man at all. He doesn't follow the mottos and the moralities of Spider-Man at all. The mistakes that he makes in this movie don't get rectified by the end of the movie. If anything, he just gets rid of his obstacle and doesn't learn the lesson, which really frustrates me about this movie, is that this movie feels like it took everything like a joke. And this is just kind of common from anything 2019 MCU onward. 2019 MCU onward just really fucking started to shit the bed. And you could tell with this one especially that they just started to not give a shit. I mean, when your first movie after Endgame is to clown and joke about the serious shit that happened in Endgame, that's not a good start to this new phase of Marvel. Or was it even a phase? I don't even remember if it was a phase at all, because it just came and went. What even happened in phase 4? I only saw like, what, 2 or 3 movies in that, and I still don't know what the fuck happened. To specify more, it's like all the consequences that Parker should have in this movie, he doesn't really get. The only major consequence that he gets is Mysterio for being a literal dumbass in this movie, because he ended up starting to trust Mysterio because he got these special glasses, which was also kind of retarded. Why would they focus on the whole Iron Man stuff again? You already made that movie with Homecoming. Why the fuck are you making that movie again? That doesn't make any sense to me. Why you would make the same movie twice about Peter Parker trying not to be the next Iron Man, or trying to be the next, I don't know what the fuck. But I just feel like the whole focus on making Iron Man a central piece of this Spider-Man movie too made no fucking sense whatsoever. There was no purpose except for like maybe Spider-Man acknowledging, you know, he lost Tony Stark, he lost Iron Man, but the fact that they tried to like tell the story that he's trying to be the next Iron Man again made no sense, especially in the context following Endgame when he should be the first Spider-Man. That's what your first story after Endgame should have been focusing on, but they didn't do that, and instead they started to make a convoluted mess where he gets these glasses and he starts doing all this tech shit. He gives it to Mysterio, Mysterio starts to control shit, and what does Spider-Man have to do? He has to fuck up Mysterio. He lets Mysterio die, which is interesting because Spider-Man would not be gloating over the death of Mysterio. Big problem right there. And then the second big problem I have is, of course, Aunt May seemingly no-selling anything that happened in Homecoming. In fact, the third biggest problem that I have is no-selling Infinity War. Excuse me, you're telling me that all of these characters seemingly were not affected at all by the 5-year gap that happened? Are you telling me that they all vanished? And if so, are you telling me that none of them care about what happened to them in those 5 years? That none of them is traumatized? How the fuck can you make a comedy, goofy Spider-Man movie after Endgame? That don't make no fucking sense whatsoever. I don't understand the direction at all. I don't understand why they made Peter Parker like this at all. I don't understand why they didn't just focus in on the whole tragedy of Endgame rather than trying to focus in on Spider-Man being the next Iron Man, Iron Boy Jr. Why? There's no point. We already did that movie. That was the whole point of Homecoming, was him overcoming Tony Stark's shadow. He already became Avenger. I don't see what the fuck. Anyway, this is easily just the worst Spider-Man movie. Like, Spider-Man movie. Not just Spider-Man movie. I'm talking about Spider-Man movie. Easily the worst. Coming in at 10th place is going to be Venom. This is another Spider-Man movie that is not that special in any way. I wouldn't say is too generic, but it is on the realm of Morbius where it's nothing too great or interesting, especially with a character like Venom, who should be extremely interesting because it's fucking Venom. And yet, you just get a bland movie, but I found this movie a lot more enjoyable than all the 3 movies I already just talked about, because at least Venom is taken seriously in this movie. Never once do I think that Venom is a joke in this movie. They treat the symbiote aspect like it's legitimate when the symbiote is possessing, or I shouldn't say possessing, is taking over a host that host, if it's not worthy, the host will die from the symbiote, and then when it gets on to Eddie Brock, for the entirety of the movie, the symbiote is treated like it is this eerie, dark force, especially with the voice, which is a lot more menacing than it is in the sequel. It's not like a cookie monster, it's actually like this dark, lingering voice that's like, oh, we can do whatever we want. There are still some stupid shits here and there. Speaking of shits, that literal line of the whole shit, the turd in the wind, ugh. Stupid, but I would have a much more fun time watching this again than any of the 3 movies I already discussed, even though there's not a lot of substance here. And speaking of substance in a way, why did they ditch the Riot angle? They had Riot, the symbiote, which is probably the most forgettable symbiote you could have possibly picked. I don't know why you picked Riot for this movie as the villain, but you had Riot taking on different hosts, and the hosts would be like these vessels who would walk around, and every time he passes on to a host, it's clear that Riot has a stronger control than the other symbiotes, because none of the hosts are like capable of being in control at all. They're mentally just gone. And I wondered why they ditched that angle when they got to the main guy. I guess because they had to have, the main guy is big villain, so they have to be all over the top villain. It's like, do you really have to? You could have just kept the whole angle that Riot, the symbiote, is the main villain, not this random dude. It's just pathetic in my opinion. We did get She-Venom, which I didn't think they would show She-Venom, but I guess they did. And that's about it. Coming in 9th place is Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, a lot of people hated this film a lot more than I think it deserves, because this movie, if any of the Spider-Man movies, should have been the Spider-Man movie to showcase Spider-Man overcoming Tony Stark's shadow. I mean, especially after this movie was following up Civil War, and he was pretty much Tony's lackey the entire time in Civil War. This movie definitely deserved to have Spider-Man shine as Spider-Man rather than Tony Stark's little pet, if you will. And I really like the aspects of that being this movie, albeit I was not a huge fan when it was discovered that we're getting a 3rd Spider-Man interpretation or movie interpretation again after we just got 2 of them in the span of like what, 15 years. It just didn't really work well with me, especially with Tom Holland. Tom Holland, he's cool for like the kid aspects of Peter Parker, but I was never too big on him from the start, from the get-go, and this movie didn't really help me get on his hype train, especially when they made all the other Spider-Man characters, who are all key players and are very valuable to the Spider-Man story, they made them all just meh. I felt like they weakened those characters heavily in this interpretation of Spider-Man. They don't feel as grand or as special, especially with the inter-race swaps. I'm not a fan of that. If you just have a character who's exactly how they look in a comic, just keep them the same way. Or what's the point of changing the race? The character is one way. If you want to do the race angle, just make a fucking new character, idiots. I also really enjoyed the Vulture in this movie. I felt like the Vulture is very intimidating and very serious, and the reveals of him being Liz's father in this interpretation, there's a lot of things about the Vulture in this version of Spider-Man that I really enjoyed, especially with the actor playing him. However, I can't say the same about Shocker. They really fucked up Shocker. I'm pretty pissed off about how they did Montana in this movie. And I really like the theme of the movie being that Parker is trying to overcome Iron Man's shadow, and that to learn the lesson that he doesn't need all this tech in order to save lives. He doesn't need all this stuff in order to be Spider-Man. He needs to just be who Spider-Man should be. And that's what I really appreciate about the themes of this story. I know a lot of people, when you look back on it, especially considering what we got with Far From Home, it doesn't age all that well, but in the time being, for what Homecoming was, I enjoyed Homecoming. I obviously don't like everything about Homecoming. I feel like there's a lot of things that could have been better in regards to Homecoming, which is why it is at this placement of the list, but I still think that it's pretty solid for the movie that it is. And I really like that at the end of the movie, he rejects Tony Stark's offer. He was becoming his own man, being Spider-Man rather than Tony Stark's lackey. Coming in 8th place is gonna be Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I know I know. A lot of people love this movie, but for me, I just don't get the specialty to it. I've never been the biggest of Miles Morales. Miles Morales, you know, I feel like there's always ways that they could make Miles Morales really cool and really interesting, but his story arc and his storyline, I was never a big fan of it. Albeit, I do like some interpretations of Miles Morales, like the Spider-Man 2 game that just came out. They made Miles Morales really awesome, really cool, and I do like the Miles Morales we get in this movie as well. I just felt like the movie in it of itself was nothing too special or nothing too interesting, especially when people are considering it to be the best Spider-Man movie. I just don't see it on that level, and to be perfectly honest with you, I genuinely don't know why I don't. Maybe it has something to do with it being an animated film, but at the same time, I know a lot of animated films that I would really praise and really like. Maybe it's just the animation style, maybe it's just the type of storytelling that they have going on with this first one that is just not too intriguing to me, but I don't know. This one just didn't intrigue me the same way that it does for a lot of people. And I wish I could pinpoint the exact reason, but I don't have an exact reason. Okay, after sitting on it for several weeks, I think I finally figured it out. I think the reason why I don't like this movie as much as the other movies is because it has a great story when it's focusing on Miles' family and Miles' story there in regards to his personal life, that the multiverse stuff feels like it strips away from that. Every time we focus on the multiverse stuff, it feels like we are taking time away from what could be very valuable out of this movie. Or at least what I could get a lot of value out of this movie. And this is something that happens in the second one too. I just don't like the idea as a whole for this all being multiverse based. I get obviously it has a reason and a purpose for it being so, which I will discuss in Across the Spider-Verse. But at the same time, I think with this trilogy focusing so much on the multiverse aspect and it going through various multiverses, it makes it more challenging for me to be able to enjoy Miles' story for Miles and his family. Even though I do understand that all of this is to play into Miles' family story, I just don't really feel like we get a lot of those moments in this film when we should have. Like, there's a lot of moments where Miles is chilling with his uncle or his dad or even his mom, and those are some of the best scenes in the movie, but every time we jump away from that, it feels like we are taking time away from the most valuable points of what could make this movie so endearing and so interesting. And I really hope that for Beyond the Spider-Verse that they focus more on that and more on Miles' story of trying to save his father and having that connection between his family, because that to me is the best part of these movies. But all in all, I think this reason has been the sole reason why I've not been able to really enjoy this one as much as the others. That, along with the animation style, which I'm not a big fan of, plus some of the humor here and there, which just doesn't make this Spider-Man movie for me. Everyone has that one adaptation of the webhead that is just not for them. This one is that one for me, unfortunately. It's nothing necessarily wrong with the film. I think the film is great, and I think the film is amazing at what it does. This adaptation does just not suit me, that's all. They obviously have a lot of cool ideas and interesting plot lines in regards to the Kingpin, in regards to the Prowler, in regards to the multiverse, but to me, I just never found it as appealing or as interesting of a movie as most people do. I think it is an alright and a good Spider-Man movie, but nothing too spectacular. Coming in at 7th place is going to be Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Now, same kind of complications that I have with Into the Spider-Verse with me, just seemingly missing some appeal in regard to Miles Morales' story here. I don't know what it is. I genuinely wish I knew what it was, but it's just an alright, really good version of Spider-Man to me, or I shouldn't say Spider-Man, I should say Miles Morales. I mean, Miles Morales is Spider-Man though, so I guess it works the same way if you really think about it that way. I especially thought that this story and the central theme of this story was hell of a lot better than Into the Spider-Verse, especially considering that you really have to think about like who's in the right, who's in the wrong, which regardless of what you think about it, there's not really a right or wrong in this situation. I mean, is Miles Morales having to choose to let his fucking father die by this villain, this no-name who eventually became this like super villain? Do you want to let your father die to this fucker? Or he risks destroying the entire multiverse because it's not the canon event. And when the movie was focusing on the whole canon event angle, I found it to be the most entertaining, the most fun. Granted, these days, when it comes to like nostalgia and like incorporating all these Easter eggs and cameos, I'm not that big on it anymore, because for one, people don't understand what makes those kind of moments so special anymore. They kind of overuse it nowadays. And for two, I don't want to let nostalgia cloud my judgment when it comes to viewing a film and critiquing a film and seeing how they are as a film in and of itself. So with that in mind, I thought that this story was really interesting when it was focusing on what the story should focus on. But everything in like the first half of the movie, I felt like there's a lot of things that could have been a lot more interesting or intriguing. I don't know, it's just me, but you know, I like the more mature stuff when it comes to Spider-Man, and the decisions near the second half of the movie was a lot more interesting than everything in the first half. It was a lot more childish, if you will. I don't know how to describe it. I did like some musical scores here and there. I don't think the soundtrack is too over like crazy, because I'm not big on like hip-hop and rap unless it's actually good, like in terms of instruments or in terms of who's actually singing behind it, or if it's just fun. That kind of soundtrack is just alright to me, but I like when this composer incorporates these hip-hop type of beats into the main score and utilize that during the major scenes of the movie. That was when it was really good. I also love the uniqueness of each character getting their own style of theme that would eventually culminate to the last score of the movie. That was awesome, and I really did enjoy Miles Morales' character throughout this entire movie and the struggles that he has to face against in order to be able to overcome. Obviously, I can't say what he is going to overcome in the end, because we still need to see part 2, Beyond the Spider-Verse, so even if I wanted to, I couldn't put this movie any higher, but for where it is, right there, 7th place, I'm satisfied with it. Coming in at 6th place is going to be Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie used to be a lot higher on the list, but as time went on, the flaws of this movie did start to weigh in on me a lot more, especially with the first half of the movie, where we just get the typical MCU style of Marvel. Well, I mean, I should say the modern day style of MCU Marvel that I'm just not a fan of whatsoever, with the over-the-top comedy, the over-the-top jokes, and throwing like funny stuff out there, and them kind of just rushing through the whole the court angle. You don't really get the court angle with them testifying for Peter Parker not being Spider-Man, or not being a murderer, I should say, not being a criminal. They kind of rush through that, be like, oh, Daredevil show up, I got that covered, don't worry about it, get on to your movie, man. And I don't really like that all too much. I also don't like the whole Strange spell, especially considering how they fucking did Doctor Strange here. It's like, I get the whole idea that Doctor Strange is trying to be helpful to Spider-Man, but are you really telling me this is the same Doctor Strange that was very adamant to Tony fucking Stark about not letting the Time Stone get in the wrong hands the entire movie of Infinity War? No. This Doctor Strange, for some reason, has no problem erasing certain people's memories on who Peter Parker really is, considering the fact of what the timeline is supposed to lead up to. I mean, I get it, he doesn't have the Time Stone anymore, so he can't really look into the future and be like, oh, this is not going to be a good timeline, right? But at the same time, I just sit there and question, why the fuck would they just have Doctor Strange just be so willing to go through with this plan? It just seems very stupid on his part, and very deserving for him getting his ass whooped later. But everything after that opening like 30 to 40 minutes, it just cranks up a notch and gets hell of a lot better when you have all the old Spider-Man villains coming in here. They have all these different awesome action sequences and fights with this version of Spider-Man against these villains, and seeing how his tech is helping him a lot more than the other Spider-Mans, like with the fight with Dr. Octopus and having this nanotech taking control of his arms. And you also have the fight in the forest with Sandman and Electro being a hell of a lot better of a Max Dillon, which I guess the complications that I have with that though is that there was no transition from Max Dillon from The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to this Spider-Man movie. He's no transition. He's just all of a sudden a cool guy who's like just naturally awesome. He's got a fade now. He's got fucking muscles now. And he's just sitting there thinking to himself, how? And in general, well. I think that half of the villains get a lot better screen time and get a lot of better story and character arcs than the other half. Like, Dr. Octopus and Green Goblin probably get the best story arcs in this whole movie, but all the other villains kind of just get sidelined. Max Dillon is just kind of this new Max Dillon that doesn't get a transition. Sandman is there, and then he's not there anymore, and then Lizard is also just there, and I don't know what it is, but I guess they couldn't get the actors for Lizard and Sandman in the actual set, which I don't know why, because they had to reuse shots, and they also had to like do the CGI Sandman being all sand. I don't know what the story is behind that, but I think it's kind of stupid how they couldn't just get the two actors in the movie to get those shots. That's a little bit ridiculous to me. I don't care if they look different. And how they ended up utilizing Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man to lift up Tom Holland's Spider-Man and to essentially help him become the better Spider-Man and learn his lessons for real this time, not that stupid Far From Home bullshit. I really enjoyed. I especially loved them interacting and them telling each other's stories about what events they had to overcome and go through, and how they ended up teaming together and fighting all these different villains in the final act. I really enjoyed that too. I especially loved Willem Dafoe's Goblin, who seemingly almost seems better than in the original Spider-Man. He seems so much more awesome, so much more cool with how he toys with Spider-Man, and how he ends up becoming a key player in Tom Holland's story is also very interesting and very intriguing for this interpretation of Spider-Man. However, like I said, I've learned to stop letting nostalgia cloud my judgment in regards to critiquing films, and all in all, if I am going to critique this film, I do have many questions as to why Tom Holland needed to have these other characters from these other movies in order to have a good Spider-Man movie for his own. I feel like that just tells you everything you need to know in regards to how the MCU is writing Spider-Man at this point in time, and just in general how the MCU is, because fucking hell. And it just makes me wonder how, if Tom Holland's Spider-Man was written better and got a better character arc, got better stories, how this moment could have been even bigger, even grander, and even more special, because now you have three Spider-Mans who I think are on the same league, rather than have this one Spider-Man who needs to be pulled up by the other two all the time, which I guess really hurts his character throughout this movie. And the whole Venom showing up and not being a part of the Sinister Six at all felt like it was pointless, because now you have the Sinister Five, and I guess it's their way of trying to like showcase Venom, you know, the symbiote being introduced in the Tom Holland universe. But again, like I said, there's just many ways how they could have made Tom Holland's Spider-Man so much more interesting, especially with that first act showcasing to you that if the other Spider-Man characters and villains and heroes didn't show up in this movie, Tom Holland's Spider-Man would have been just as bad, on the same level as Far From Home. And that really sucks, because I don't think he deserves, you know, that kind of style for his movies. I think that Tom Holland is really good as Spider-Man, but they're really fucking him over with all the storytelling and the way that they're utilizing his Spider-Man, with making him more of a joke than a serious Spider-Man like the other two. I'm not a big fan of that, so this is one of the major reasons why this movie has just constantly been going down the ranking over time, and I feel like at some point in time it's going to be even lower, and that's gonna suck, because I don't want it to be lower. I think this movie is really good at bringing Spider-Man fans together to see these Spider-Men all be together and fight against all these villains. But when you look at it from a film standpoint, it sucks how they have to have nostalgia in order to elevate the modern day current Spider-Man. Coming in at 5th place is going to be The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, I found this movie to be a lot more enjoyable than I thought I would, because everybody made this Spider-Man movie to be terrible, awful, and all that showbiz. But compared to Far From Home, this is a leg up. It's that fucking good. Now, this movie does have the big flaw that Spider-Man 3 ended up having, which is the fact that this movie has too much to juggle than it should have. It's trying to juggle the Harry storyline with Electro's storyline, with the relationship of Peter and Gwen, when I think only one of those should have been focused on. Honestly, I think this movie should have been Harry Osborn's movie. They shouldn't have had Electro. The whole Rhino shit you could have left out for another time. I guess they had to shoehorn Rhino in to be like, oh look, this is gonna be Spider-Man's next villain in Spider-Man 3 because we're gonna get the Sinister Six, because they fucking want to do the Sinister Six so fucking bad. Like, what the fuck? I get it, it's the Sinister Six, but like, can you chill the fuck out for a second? You don't need to rush into the fucking Sinister Six. But when this movie is good, this movie is good. The writing, which is something that I'm going to talk about with the first Amazing Spider-Man, is just amazing in regards to like the character between Peter Parker and Gwen. I just absolutely love their chemistry, their dialogue, and how they communicate with each other. It just feels so natural and authentic, and it doesn't feel forced at all. It just feels like how two human beings like this would just communicate, and I fucking love it so much. Whoever fucking wrote this shit deserves to be notified for how good their writing is, honestly. And I really love the action scenes in this movie. They are very beautiful, especially considering like the CGI compared to Marvel CGI. It just looks so gorgeous and so amazing and spectacle how they utilize like the shots with Electro's electricity and Spider-Man swinging through the streets and stuff. I just fucking love it so much, and it makes me wonder why the MCU can't fucking be that good. I also really enjoy bringing on Hans Zimmer to do the score this time around. I feel like he did a hell of a lot better job making the score a lot more unique and stand out than in the first Amazing Spider-Man, where I could actually tell like whose theme is what track is playing here, and I could actually like be in the mood of the movie whilst listening to the music play out. I mean, that's kind of just Hans Zimmer for you. All in all, I just had a blast with this movie compared to some of the other movies I just finished talking about. Albeit the mistakes are still huge mistakes. The whole rushing into the Goblin angle, I felt like really halted this movie, really halted the momentum of what could have been Harry and Peter's relationship with each other. I feel like it was just rushed to shoehorn in the whole Gwen dying by the Goblin angle, which they didn't really have to rush that. If they would have just focused on Harry Osborn from the get-go and just him slowly becoming Goblin and just got rid of Electro, got rid of Rhino and all this extra storyline shit, they could have had a really great movie on their hand. But of course, you know, they want to build up the Sinister Six, and so you have to have all these different villains. You have to have Electro, who you can just tell they didn't have much for Electro. They made him so weird and kooky of a character. I don't know what it is, but Jamie Foxx's performance as Electro in this movie just was not that interesting at all, not that intriguing. It was definitely a different interpretation of Max Dillon than we're used to, and I don't think it's a good thing, because he just seems very like nerdy and like a super fan. Oh, Spider-Man. Oh, Spider-Man gonna be at my birthday. I don't really like it all too much. I don't really like Electro in this movie all too much, except for that badass theme. What the fuck, Hans Zimmer? Still my second most viewed video to this day. It's not my most viewed video anymore. You could blame Five Nights at Freddy's for that. All in all, with this movie, I feel like I would have a lot better time rewatching this Spider-Man movie again over the Miles Morales ones, mainly due to the fact with the writing. I just really enjoyed the writing. I really enjoy getting invested between Gwen and Peter with their character arcs and with their relationship with each other. It's just very appealing to me, and the action scenes are very much more appealing and awesome to me than it would be with the other Miles Morales Spider-Man movies. Coming in at fourth place is going to be Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, the OG Spider-Man, the one that kick-started this entire Marvel arc, to be perfectly honest with you. Without Spider-Man by Sam Raimi, you would not have the grandeur of superhero movies that you have today. This Spider-Man movie, X-Men, and Blade were really the three motherfuckers who kick-started Marvel as it is, the powerhouse that it is today. Or I guess the powerhouse that it was in the mid to late 2010s. Anywho, the original Spider-Man, I gotta admit, before I even talk about all the things that I love about the original Spider-Man, that this movie is hella dated. There's a lot of things that just did not age all that well in terms of CGI, in terms of movements, in terms of dialogue, in terms of story arcs and characters. I mean, everybody clowns Mary Jane. This version of Mary Jane for being a literal bitch, a literal slut throughout the entire movie. And yet, the thing about this Spider-Man movie is that it has that charm of anything that came out in the 2000s, whether it be music, games, or movies, that is just very campy, but also very cheesy, but it worked for the era and it worked for the time frame. I get how people of modern times, they can't really like look back on this and be like, well, how did you enjoy it to that degree? I get that, but if you were somebody who grew up in like the 2000s, who really like understood the 2000s style of stuff, campy, cheesy stuff that still was like a little bit serious was the norm. That style of film, that style of games, that style of music was what was popping at the time, what was really cool, what was very interesting, what was very likable at the time. Because even though it was campy, even though it could be very cheesy, that unique, weird style to it was what made the flavor of the actual substance even more interesting, even more intriguing. And the same thing is with this Spider-Man movie. Just really like made Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man even more special in this movie. However, if there's one thing that I think no one can deny about this Spider-Man movie, which is awesome, besides J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, which was fucking amazing casting, is the Green Goblin. Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin was easily the greatest thing that we got out of this movie. From start to finish, that motherfucker is awesome. He is so good as the Goblin, and he really showcases what the Goblin should really be like in terms of that craziness, but in terms of that intelligence as well, and being a really good foe to Spider-Man on the same level as Spider-Man, always facing against the Spider-Man. And all in all, for the time frame, that physical, like grounded action fight scenes where they're punching the shit at each other, kicking and brawling each other, was awesome to see. As cool as it is now to get all these CGI over the top grand fight scenes and stuff, at the time that fist fighting just really showcased like the cinematography and them just fighting and having the skills of just like brawling each other, doing all these backflips. Obviously they had wires and stuff, but it made it so much more realistic and much more in the moment, grounded at the time frame that it was. And obviously, even though I'm not a huge fan of origin stories, of like character origin stories, because how many can you do of the same thing before it just gets stale? Spider-Man's origin story was always more unique to me because you have Peter Parker who not only just gains powers, but he also loses something at the same time, which is Uncle Ben. And how they do that in this movie with Danny Elfman's amazing score throughout the entirety of this movie just really elevated what Spider-Man should be and what made Spider-Man what he is, what made this version of Spider-Man what he can be. And even though right now this is easily like the weakest of the three Spider-Man Raimi films in my opinion, I still think it is a worthy watch for anyone who either enjoys the 2000s campy, cheesy style of movies, or who really enjoys the themes and the storytelling that Sam Raimi tried to incorporate with this Spider-Man based off of the comics. Coming in at third place is gonna be The Amazing Spider-Man. Now I gotta admit something. I never gave The Amazing Spider-Man a chance. I never watched The Amazing Spider-Man when it first initially came out, because when you're someone who grew up with the original Spider-Man comics, the Raimi trilogy of Spider-Man, the 90s animated Spider-Man series, and Spectacular Spider-Man, let's just say that my expectations were through the fucking roof. So when it came along to The Amazing Spider-Man and it was revealed that there wasn't gonna be a Spider-Man 4 and that they're rebooting and doing it over again, I didn't give a shit. And so naturally I never watched the movie. I only saw like 2 clips all the way up until No Way Home was about to release, and I had to check out the Amazing Spider-Man films just so I could be up to date on things. And my goodness, I gotta admit, I should have not have slept on this movie, because whoever the writer is for the Amazing Spider-Man duology there is fucking amazing. I fucking love the writer so much because the dialogue just feels so authentic and natural. It feels like every time I see a character on screen and they start talking, it doesn't feel like it's a character in a movie. It feels like an actual person that I'd be talking to, and how they would react to things, and how they would respond to things, and how they would communicate with each other. It just feels so natural, so authentic, nothing feels forced. It just flows so perfectly that I just fucking love this writer, and I wish that this writer, whoever wrote this Spider-Man film, would continue to write Spider-Man films because of how good it was, and how good it was for Spider-Man to have such good characters. Even someone like Flash Thompson, who is kind of just like a throwaway in these movies, actually felt like he had some character arc later on in the movie when he started to be a better person, when he started to treat, you know, Peter Parker a little bit differently, and they became buddies. And that was something that I really fucking love about this movie, was how great the character arcs were in this movie. Even if they were minute, even if they were barely on screen, it just felt like the characters were being treated with so much love, to the point where I felt like the movie could have done perfectly well if it was just focusing on the main Spider-Man plot, which was just Spider-Man trying to get revenge for Uncle Ben's death. But of course, people wouldn't watch a Spider-Man movie unless it had one of the big villains, well-known villains. And you could just tell that the Lizard didn't get as much character or as much love as the rest of the characters in the story, because when the Lizard gets introduced, it feels like the Lizard's plot line is just kind of rushed through, and it's just kind of forced to push the story forward. I don't really like it all too much, because I feel like the story was just great as is, with Peter Parker just trying to focus on who killed his uncle and trying to find him, because that was probably one of the best themes of the story, was that Peter Parker eventually never ends up finding who killed Uncle Ben, and that plays so heavily into his character arc with Captain Stacy and with Gwen Stacy as well. And I just wonder, like, why the Lizard didn't get as much love or as much care in terms of character as did the other characters. Albeit, the Lizard has always been a character who has been very straightforward. He's either a crazy reptilian monster, or he is something that wants to turn the whole world into other reptilian creatures like himself in order to just experience the power. And I do like the fact that they just get straight to the point with the Lizard, but I don't like the fact that they sacrifice the story with Kirk Connors and how his development slowly going insane when he becomes the Lizard, and slowly getting influenced by the Lizard's brain in his mind starts to change him physically, and how he eventually, when he starts to turn other people into lizards, how that starts to affect the story overall, with New York eventually becoming a reptilian city. That felt like it just came so forced and so like head on that you didn't really get a chance to process Kirk Connors' slow descent into becoming this monster, becoming this creature. And to be perfectly honest with you, had it not been for the Lizard character, I think that this Spider-Man film would have been absolutely flawless, absolutely perfect. That's just how good the writing is with this story, and that's just how good Andrew Garfield's performance as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man is with this movie. Even though it is a lot darker in terms of like, it's a lot edgier tone with the look of Spider-Man, with the style, with it all being in like darker themes to fit, like, I guess the Dark Knight of Batman. I, of course, am one who enjoys that kind of style. Even if it's not classic Spider-Man of the colorful, bright imagery, I would have been perfectly fine with it had they just landed the plane with the Lizard. Especially with his design. I don't really like the design of the Lizard in this one. I don't like how his face is just humanoid. I just wish he kind of had the reptilian, like, crocodile snout, but it, you know, it is what it is. But if it were not for just the Lizard, I would say that this would have been a flawless Spider-Man film, because it is just that good. Which I guess begs the question why this next film I'm about to put is over this one, and that is second place, which is Spider-Man 3. So as anyone could tell you, Spider-Man 3 is not a flawless film, but I never really knew the magnitude of how much people actually hated this film. I didn't know people hated this film. For a long time, I thought the trilogy was always hailed as like one of the best movie trilogies of all time because it was just that good. But then around when Tom Holland's MCU Spider-Man started to come along, and they started to have the arguments in regards to Tom Holland's Spider-Man not getting as much care and love, the argument of Spider-Man 3 being absolutely terrible started to roll in, and people saying like, oh, Spider-Man 3 is just trash, garbage, it's just a joke. And I never got it. I never got it. I never knew where that came from. I felt like it just kind of came out of nowhere, because legitimately, when I was a kid, everyone loved Spider-Man 3, even adults. Like, I didn't know a single person who did not like Spider-Man 3 when it first came out. And I'll give credit where credit is due. Obviously, Sam Raimi had an envisionment for one thing, and the studio had an envisionment for another thing. And I feel like had they just got rid of one element, they could have merged their ideas into one and made an absolutely perfect film. And of course, that one flaw that I think they messed up heavily with this Spider-Man film is Harry Osborn, and forcing him to be the new Goblin right now, instead of like playing it out a little bit more, showcasing Harry and Peter's relationship getting a little bit more rocky as Peter becomes a symbiote, and how that affects Harry's relationship and wants him to eventually turn into the Goblin. He's like, you know what? Peter is an asshole. Spider-Man is a dickhead. I'm gonna turn into the Goblin now. And that could have been Spider-Man 4. So I always faulted the film for that, and rushing through Harry's plotline and the whole Mary Jane shit, which was very like, it takes you out of the moment of what Spider-Man 3 could really be, which is Sandman and the symbiote, which should have been the main focuses of the story. I can also fault this film for not having the best Venom and not having the best Eddie Brock. Eddie Brock in this movie was supposed to be like a reflection of Peter Parker, a nerdy guy who wants to get a photography gig, who eventually becomes as vengeful as Peter and eventually becomes Venom. But how they utilize Venom, of course, it can easily be critiqued, especially with more modern day interpretations of Venom, and how awesome they ended up making Venom later on in the future, and how they kind of just rushed through the whole Venom angle because they were running low on time and they had to just quickly get to that final fight with Venom and Sandman versus Peter Parker and Harry Osborn, which I will argue is probably still the best final battle in any Spider-Man film ever. It's fucking amazing. But in terms of like genuinely saying that this is a terrible movie, I will never understand, especially when it comes to the whole symbiote Peter Parker thing. People clown the symbiote Peter Parker because it's so memeable, but like I said earlier with the first Spider-Man movie, if you know anything about the 2000s era, you knew that campy, cheesy style of the 2000s was always the style of these kind of movies. This has always been something that's been around, and if you grew up in that time frame, this is something that you're kind of used to. Like myself, I really love the campy 2000s, and I can absolutely see why somebody may not like the campy 2000s, but at the same time, to argue that the Peter Parker stuff in this movie wasn't warranted would be hypocritical, because the Peter Parker that we get with the symbiote in here is supposed to be the juxtaposition of the Peter Parker from Spider-Man 2, when he's doing the raindrops keep falling on my head and he's like better and he's all nerdy again. That was supposed to be the juxtaposition, where you have this Peter Parker is supposed to think that he's cool, that he's edgy, but he's a nerd, so this is how a nerd would do it. You know, he's doing the finger points and he's doing these weird ass dances, he thinks he's cool, but everyone's looking at him like, what the fuck? And eventually when he gets to the bar and he's doing all this crazy shit, he's thinking that he's over the top and shit, but in reality he's being a shitty ass person, being weird as fuck, doing some terrible shit. And in my eyes, it was a really nice way to make Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man fit the role of the symbiote arc. That to me worked really well. Now in terms of why I find this movie more rewatchable, more entertaining than The Amazing Spider-Man, after I just got done saying that I think that The Amazing Spider-Man would have been flawless if the whole lizard angle would have been done better, is because Spider-Man 3, to me, the theme, the central core theme of Spider-Man 3, with overcoming pride, overcoming ego, and trying to regain, recapture who Peter Parker is, and remember like what truly made him Spider-Man, what made him follow the themes of responsibility, was probably one of the best storytelling of any of these Spider-Man movies. No matter how much we deviated or how much we did all this convoluted shit with Harry Osborn or Eddie Brock or the symbiote or even Sandman at times, the central theme of Spider-Man overcoming that pride and ego to regain who Spider-Man truly is always stayed the same. It always went in a straight line, and to me it always is one of the best stories of Spider-Man and of Peter Parker, to where when you have those emotional dramatic moments for Peter Parker in this movie, they all hit, they all land, and they all feel very impactful. And I fucking absolutely loved every ounce of that storytelling. Even though everything else may have been a little bit messy, I love that central theme, and I could deal with all the convoluted mess as a fun, entertaining blast just to watch, just to have fun, and just to enjoy. Because to me, the main central theme of this movie is what carries it and what makes this movie so memorable, especially in that ending when you have Harry Osborn and Peter Parker finally teaming up and they finally unite, is probably one of the best Spider-Man moments of all time. It's still iconic, and the ending being on this sorrow note rather than the typical happy swing at the end of every Spider-Man is what makes this Spider-Man movie to me so special. But for me, coming in at number 1 is going to be Spider-Man 2. It is absolutely flawless. I don't care what anybody says. This movie is absolutely perfect on a movie standpoint in every single way. It somehow blends every single genre of film, of storytelling, and utilizes every single genre perfectly. The comedy is awesome. The fucking drama is awesome. The horror elements are awesome. The thriller elements are awesome. The action is awesome. The romance is even awesome. What the fuck? And everything else about this movie is fucking awesome. This continues to this day to battle against John Carpenter's The Thing on which one is going to be my favorite movie of all time, because I genuinely don't know, because this movie is so fucking good. Even right now, I have no idea which one I would pick because they're both so damn good. But the thing about this Spider-Man movie is that this Spider-Man movie does everything, and it doesn't have to cop out on campy cheesiness. It doesn't have to cop out on convoluted stories. It knows exactly what its story is, and it tells exactly what its story is, and it always keeps the themes in check. It always keeps the characters in check. It always keeps everything in check. This is what I would call, or what the kids would call, cinema. I fucking love Spider-Man 2. Every single nuance, every single little detail is so great. The acting is great. The performances are great. The style of cinematography is great. The editing is great. The music is great. Everything is so good. I could list everything. You could list anything about this movie and I will tell you exactly how it is awesome. To this day, there are so many elements about this movie that still surprise me. Hell, there's even a scene in this movie that somehow is still to this day the scariest scene I've ever seen in any movie, including every single horror movie that I've ever seen. That's saying a lot about Sam Raimi and how well he fucking incorporated that into this story without it even having to be a horror story, and with how awesome everything is and how great all the scenes are, and how every single scene feels like it matters in this movie. No matter if Peter is talking to Aunt May, no matter if Peter is going into a burning building to save a little kid, no matter if Peter Parker is just delivering some motherfucking pizza, you are going to have a blast with this movie from beginning to end, because I have a blast with this movie from beginning to end, and not a single Spider-Man movie I don't think could ever top this, because everything was so great, so good, and I really want something to top this, because that just showcases to me the amount of love that someone would have for Spider-Man as much as Sam Raimi did for making this sequel. This will continue to be my #1 Spider-Man film, and this will continue to be in battle for my #1 movie of all time. But what about y'all? I know some of y'all are gonna have different opinions in regards to Spider-Man, and I'm all for it. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say. No, I'm not, I'm lying, but you know what? You could still leave it in the comments, because why the fuck not? You know, if I'm ranking, you can rank. And you know what? Since this is going to be most likely the last ranking of films that I ever do on the channel, just want to say thank you for coming along. And as a matter of fact, let's face the facts. I'm here to give you a reality check, and if you can't handle that, I'll beat you with a baseball bat. Most likely. Best believe. Arrivederci, ya bitch ass motherfuckers.